command I'm going to be teaching you tonight is counter march. Now, counter march, the purpose of this command is to turn the entire flight 180 degrees into the opposite direction without having to do a flank, a number of different columns, or just simply having to turn the flight, halt the flight, fall out, and reform the other direction. Instead, this movement allows us to keep marching, but turns the flight completely in on itself to go in the opposite direction. Now I will demonstrate, however, I will demonstrate it piece by piece for each element. So I will signal which element I am demonstrating for each part. This is not representing the entirety of the flight. I'm representing, again, each element. Forward, march. Counter, march. So as you can see there, that was from the perspective of the first element. The first element takes 4 steps. Notice how I did that. Again, each element has a different number of steps. I'll continue demonstrating with the second element. Counter, march. Third element. Counter, march. And finally, the fourth element. I will portray this both as the guide and with the rest of the element. So for the first part, I will enact as the guide. Counter, march. And now as the fourth element leader. Counter, march. So that is counter march, and once all the elements are finished with their pivots and gone or in the respective direction that they have pivoted into, which is going backwards, or which you would think is backwards when you turn the flight 180 degrees around, then you would go into half steps. Not more time, half steps. Also take note that you would pivot on the same place where each person pivoted. Now, it is also important to make sure that we understand that counter march is not a precise movement. It is not designed to be this very extremely precise movement that is conducted by cadets or personnel in general, and to make it, be the most flashy or showy way of moving people around. It's simply a way that has been designed. It looks cool because of the fact that we are turning the flight in on itself with each element. That's the only reason why it looks cool, because it looks like the flight is turning in on itself. When in reality, it's just each individual element is taking different amounts of steps, different pivots into different directions, and then basically inverting itself in the other direction to where we are reordering the elements to be in a proper order. Because if we were to turn the flight, for example, in a to the rear while in column, we are inverted. Obviously, we cannot march while inverted, because it puts us backwards and it puts the element order backwards. Therefore, doing counter march, if you notice, the first element goes around the entirety of the flight and goes around, and each of the elements follows suit with what their respective steps and what their respective directions are. So I have a piece of paper that will help visualize exactly what I'm talking about. And that is this here. So this explains, or it shows better how a counter march works. So this is the in column, or when we are in column as a flight. This is the front, the relative front I'm speaking, where we are facing this front where we are marching. So these represent each element number: first, second, third, and fourth. These boxes with the crosses inside represent the element leaders, and this one represents the guide, because there's only one. Each of these numbers represents not their element, it represents how many steps they take. So notice here, especially this point here, is for the guide. So we notice how the guide takes only 1 step, while the rest of the element takes 3. So just to make it as clear as possible for you cadets, is that the first element, you will take 4 steps. So as soon as and counter march is called on the right foot. So as soon as the command execution is called, counter march, start counting. So left 1, 2, 3, 4. On that fourth step, that is when you count, and then you know that next pivot turn. Okay, so again, first element, counter march, 1, 2, 3, 4, pivot to the right. Okay, so we notice that I've also drawn some arrows to show which direction you pivot. So the first element, 4 pivots, and then you pivot to the right, and then for each element, it doesn't matter how many steps you take exactly to get out from the front of the flight and to turn yourselves around back 180 degrees the other direction, or to fully get us back in that direction. But what matters is that you get yourselves out of the front of the flight and you clear yourselves out of it, and you go to the front, and you go the other direction. So it doesn't matter whether this is, I'm just spitting out numbers here, but say for example 6, 10, 8 steps, whatever. So long as you clear the flight, you're going to be marching in the same direction anyway, and then you're going to be going to half steps. So it won't matter how far exactly you are, so long as you aren't insanely far. So long as you clear the flight, and once you notice that you've cleared the rest of the elements here, for example, the first element, once you clear the fourth element, and you take a pivot, whether it be immediately after you clear the last man or whoever it may be, you're going to be going to half steps. So you're going to be adjusting your proper interval and distance and such afterwards anyway. So don't need to worry about how many steps this is. So continuing on, the second element, you're going to take 2 steps and then pivot to the right. And again, another indiscriminate number of steps here before you need a pivot. And make sure though that when you do those steps, you aren't pivoting on an awkward foot, for example. So if you take 3 steps, I'm just spitting out numbers again. If you take 3 steps and you pivot on your right foot to turn right, obviously that's going to be a problem because you're going to be off step from the rest of the flight, and you're going to be off step and you're going to mess up the cadence for the rest of your element as well. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that consistent and you're maintaining proper drill sequences and rules while you're marching, even though this is, as I said before, a not precise movement. That doesn't mean we can exclude the known rules of drill that we've already have been demonstrating. Third element, you're going to be taking 1 step forward, so basically 1 immediate step, and then pivoting to the left, and then pivoting back into the other direction. Fourth element, for the guide, you will be taking the guide. No, I'm saying again, the guide, not the rest of the cadets or the rest of the element. Guide, you will take 1 step and then do an immediate pivot, and then pivot again into once you've cleared the second element. The rest of the fourth element, you will take 3 steps. So you're basically covering up this area here while he's the guide, while he's taking his step. You're basically catching up, or you're continuing marching until you get to his spot where he pivoted, and you're going to basically follow him because you're going to be a little bit distance away until you get to his position, and you march through it, and then you start pivoting. And also make sure you do not begin pivoting immediately. This isn't a column, and make sure you also don't go immediately into half step. You go into half step after you make the pivots, and after you've made the proper adjustment when you're probably facing the opposite direction. You don't go into half step as soon as you hear the command. You maintain full step and full stride and full cadence until you get to this position where we are flipped around. So are there any questions? Alright, we're going to go ahead and practice it. Make sure, remember, this is only called while in column formation. This can be commanded with fewer elements. It's just a matter of variables and changing it up how it is. But for our sake, because we have 4 elements today, we will conduct it as such with the 4 elements. Flight teach, hut, right, haste, forward, arch, counter, arch. Forward, arch, flight, halt, right, haste, eddies. So element leaders, we make sure that we are still maintaining a proper pivot Second element leader, I noticed that you pivot on your right foot, which is exactly what I said not to do. We need to make sure that we are pivoting on the proper foot, because if you're going to pivot to the right, it doesn't make any sense that you're going to pivot on your right foot, because it's awkward and it throws you off cadence. You threw off the entire your rest of your element off step because you did that made that decision. Easily one more step, and you would have still cleared the cadets in between you, and you would have maintained the proper pivot and the proper cadence. So to make sure that we're keeping that consistent. First and third element, make sure that you are maintaining proper drill sequence, as in proper arm positions while you're pivoting. Make sure they are pivoted. When they're pivoted, you maintain your arms pinned to the side, so do not swing them around. You've already been instructed that they should be pivoted. They should be pinned to your side. So all element leaders in general, make sure that we're going to half step. This gives us time for the rest of the flight to catch up and to realign with each other. If we don't go into half step, then it doesn't allow the rest of the flight to catch up, because if you keep maintaining full step, then they can't catch up and they kind of have to do a light jog to get back to us. All right, are there any questions? All right. And that is counter march.